Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Hi, Susan. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for having me on this show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to start off by asking, how do you describe yourself and what it is that you do?
Do you know, that's a really interesting question because I actually have two businesses. One of them is Viva Live Music, and I organise live musical entertainment for events. Some of them are corporate, some of them are private, here in the United Kingdom and in Europe. And the other business that I have, where I'm a sole trader, which is me on my own for an American audience, that is a company where I train people to use their voices, their presence, their performance, thinking about the audience, all things like that when they communicate in business.
Oh, that's fascinating and very needed. It seems like communication, particularly in that sense, like, you know, voice modulation, pitch, isn't something that's normally taught in the average university program.
I would agree with that, and I suspect there is some sensitivity around it. I believe, and what I see quite often is that if people get criticism or if they get laughed at, they will put a barrier up and say something like, well, this is me, this is my brand. When in fact some of the criticism could be quite valuable for them to grow as a person, whether they're a podcaster, a vlogger, doing presentations. And if they keep that mindset, well, this is who I am, this is my brand, they might be missing a huge trick. It's a tricky one.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's such a personal thing, someone's voice and how they communicate it. It must be something where you have to overcome kind of our own insecurities in that way.
I agree. And even with people that reach out to me to do some work, I do have a confidentiality agreement with them because a lot of people wouldn't be very happy about it being made public that they're having some work like this or doing some work like this. So I always respect that.
Okay. Oh, that's great. What is one important thing that you learned growing up from a parent or a teacher or mentor that had an impact on the work that you're doing today?
It's very much to have a goal, to have a target, and to work towards it. You know, there's a lot going on about visualizing things that you want. And I'm all for that, but actually working, yeah, I know. By magic, it will manifest itself.
Exactly.
I've been on visualization board things where the lady leading them has said, oh, you just got to manifest it, as though it just happens with magic. And, you know, everyone to their own. Let's face it, the world is made up of different people. But I know that if you have a dream, that you've got to work out the little steps that you need to do to get there. So I know that we were speaking before this podcast about a dance production you were involved in. All of those dancers would have had a dream to be a dancer, and they would have had to work out those little steps to improve so that they reached the stage where they could be in that production.
Yes, they could. And I'm sure the one particularly who injured themselves probably didn't manifest that.
No, certainly didn't visualize it.
No, they should have visualized harder to not. Maybe that's what it was, is they focused on the wrong thing. They should have focused on
Absolutely.
not injuring their neck during the previous night's performance.
If only we'd had this conversation before.
I know. It would have saved me so much more time on my Sunday. So would you walk me through your journey from your early stages and what got you involved in music up and through, your early music career?
Yeah, it's quite a sort of roundabout way that I came to do music, because I always showed musical talent even at a very, very young age. And I sang my first solo as a shepherd, as you do in the nativity play, but I was the soloist. I was just really annoyed that I wasn't an angel. I thought, but I looked more like a shepherd, presumably, and I had this solo. But my family never sort of built that up as being something really important. They almost took the mickey out of me and almost suppressed all of those musical abilities. But I was always involved in music. I was a soloist in the local radio, age 10, playing violin and singing, and always in the orchestras and choirs. And I would hold whichever line was required in a girls' school. Mm-hmm. But I didn't do A-level music for a couple of reasons, and went and studied geography at university. But it was only after, a very difficult time in my life when I was very badly injured in a car crash, that when I was recovering, somebody suggested I audition for one of those big choral choirs in London. And the conductor happened to be, now, she wasn't at the time, an international, the conductor who's an international conductor now, heard me and said, Susan, you're not an alto, which is the lowest female voice. You're a soprano, and it's a really special voice. I really recommend you go and get it trained. And it went from there. So quite soon after I started having lessons, my teacher was recommending me for sort of little paid jobs like weddings and things like that. And then I came over to the States and did an exchange with some American pro-am people, and I sang off-Broadway in a production of The Pajama Game, and I was the lead. No, not Nellie Forbush, Babe Williams. And yeah, and then, can you imagine? And then I went to music college. I got some scholarships and a scholarship to study in Italy, and then was a jobbing singer. So having been trained to be a teacher in a primary school or elementary school, as you would call it, and my dream had been to travel the world teaching in different countries to see the world, I ended up being a jobbing singer.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And then I retired, much to the disgust of my family and my husband and my singing teachers and colleagues, because I had a son and found it quite difficult to combine that with, because even as a singer, you've got to be like an athlete, and you've got to be physically very strong, and also with your mindset. After I had my son, a couple of years after I retired, but I was meeting what I would call normal people, not people from Planet Opera who are, you know exactly what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I've spent a lot of time in the opera world. I know exactly what you mean.
You know exactly what I mean. I was meeting normal people, sane people. Did I say that? And people that valued some of the skills that I had naturally, or skills that I had developed being a singer. Mm-hmm. And not only were people asking me to, do you think you could organise this music for me for this wedding or this corporate do? Or how is it that you're able to project your voice without shouting? And so when Nick went to school, having never had a business, I first of all developed the music business, Viva Live Music, with no contacts, only musical contacts, no client base, and then afterwards Executive Voice. And that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. Slowly, and now my son's 17, I'm, very much expanding. Not physically, I'm not getting bigger. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. You're expanding your business. So if you would take me through some of the early days, so you started Viva Live Music and the Executive Vice concurrently, is that correct?
It's not Vice.
What? I'm sorry?
It sounded like Vice, Executive Vice.
Oh, Voice. Sorry, Voice. It is probably my accent. So Executive Voice. Did you start both of those concurrently, or was it one
I didn't.
after the other? Okay.
Very much Viva Live Music first.
Okay. And then with those, because you mentioned that you only had connections in the music world, were there books that you reached out to and read, or mentors? How did you create that, like a basic plan for everything else, or figure out how to find clients and market yourself and get out there?
You know what? You're going to scream at this. I had no plan. I totally, you're a creative.
Mm-hmm.
You know where I'm going on this.
I do. I know exactly what you mean with that. It's it's the part that I never really, especially in the early days, never even thought about.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Created it and not thinking about the clients. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously thinking about the clients, but not in a way of targeting them. Mm-hmm. And it was only through going to network groups, and initially I went to some what I would call ladies who lunch networking groups, or we call them the Cupcake Brigade. But, yeah, you know exactly what I mean. Of mums that want to have a little business, but it's very much a lifestyle business, and I totally get that, because that was what I needed with a child who was at elementary school himself. But from that, I was able to pick up the idea of, you've got to have a target market message and all of those things. So it was a very organic process rather than having a proper business plan. And I had written a business plan, but it was, I'd love this, and actually my dreams. And I hadn't thought about those little steps, if I'm being really honest.
Of course, and I appreciate your honesty. That actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That's how so many people that's what I did in the early days, and there's a lot of people that I know currently who are the same kind of thing. They're creatives trying to come up with something else, and it is more of what you'd like to do versus what a traditional business plan would look like. Because that's how you think. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. And my message to your audience would be, just don't do what I did. At least have a little picture with a flow chart of how you're created, what you have created, and some little arrows down to your target audience. That's enough.
So how did you then grow Viva Live Music from your early stages of just what you wanted it to do to where it is right now?
I think that's really interesting, because remember, this was 11, 12 years ago, and it was a different world. The internet wasn't as dominant. Social media wasn't as dominant. And so there was an awful lot of picking up the phone, contacting local venues where they had weddings, seeing if I could pop in and leave some postcards and that sort of thing. I mean, yes, we did have a website, an old-fashioned one that I built, and that's really how I worked. Trying to get on as many local directories, which, those sorts of things just don't exist in the same way now.